Jain friends, in today's lecture we will discuss JDBC. So these are the outlines of today's lecture. Firstly, we will discuss JDBC overview, types of drivers, API and way to connect the databases. So what is JDBC? JDBC stands for Java Database Connectivity. It provides a standard library for Java programs to connect a database and send it commands using SQL. It generalizes common database access function into a set of common classes and methods. It abstracts vendor-specific details into a code library, making a connectivity to the multiple database that is transparent to the user. So, JDBC provides a mechanism through which we can connect our application, Java application, with different kinds of databases. So, to connect database with Java application, there is a JDBC API. So, JDBC API provides a way to establish connection to the database. It provides an approach to initiate the queries that we can apply on database, and it provides a method to create stored procedure, and at last it creates the data structure of the query result. So JDBC API provides these four kinds of things through which we can connect our application with the database and we can process the results on the database. Now, JDBC API, Java Database Connectivity API, comes with two packages, java.sql package and javix.sql package. Javix.sql package contains all the core classes and methods that are required to access the database. And it is a part of Java 2 standard development kit, standard edition, and javix.sql is another package that contains some optional features in JDBC 2.2 API, and it is a part of Java 2 standard kit and enterprise edition. So basic classes and methods are written inside this package, and optional or additional classes and methods are written inside this javix.sql package. Javix.sql provide additional functionality for enterprise application like data sources, Java naming and directory interface, connection pooling, row sets, and distributed transactions. So these are the additional functionality that javix.sql provides us. Otherwise, we will use only this package, java.sql. So major work will be done through this package only. If we want to do some additional things, then we can include this package. Now let's see the architecture of JDBC. JDBC consists of two parts. One is JDBC API, second one is JDBC Driver Manager. JDBC API, a purely Java-based API, and JDBC Driver Manager, which communicates with vendor-specific drivers that perform the real communication with the database. So we need both JDBC API as well as JDBC Driver Manager. So let's see this diagram. There is a Java, one side there is a Java application, and in between there is a JDBC API And this JDBC API provides a mechanism through which we can connect this Java application with JDBC driver manager helps to the database. Now this driver consists several different kinds of drivers like JDBC ODBC bridge driver, and this JDBC ODBC bridge driver connect with vendor specific ODBC drivers and then connect with your database. So there are two important things. One is JDBC API and second one is JDBC driver API, through which we can connect our Java application to the vendor specific database. So what is the meaning of vendor specific? Vendor specific means there may be different kinds of open database like Oracle, SQL, MySQL, Access, right? So there may be different kinds of database in which we can store our data. So JDBC driver API provides a mechanism through which we can connect different kinds of vendor specific database to the Java application. Now, as I told you that there are different kinds of drivers. So JDBC use drivers to translate generalized JDBC calls into the vendor specific database. Vendor specific, I told you that different kinds of database can be Oracle, MySQL, MS Access, SQL, and any other database. So vendor specific database calls can be connected. Vendor specific database call can be connected through this JDBC call by using these four kinds of drivers. So four drivers named as type 1 driver, type 2 driver, type 3 driver, type 4 driver. Now let's see what is type 1 driver. Type 1 driver provides a mapping between JDBC and Access API of a database. So what is Access API? Access API calls a native API of database to establish a communication. Let's see this diagram. There is a client application and there is a type 1 driver. Then type 1 driver connect with two layers in between. One is ODBC API and second one is native API, and then it connects the database. So the API Access API calls the native API of the database, to connect to the database. Right? So a common type 1 driver defines a JDBC to ODBC bridge, and ODBC is the database connectivity for the database, where JDBC driver translates the JDBC calls to the corresponding ODBC calls. But there are some limitation of this type 1 driver, that it is inefficient because it goes through multiple layers. So these are two layers to connect the application to the database. So this is the problem with type 1 driver. And second is functionality of JDBC code is limited wherever ODBC supports. So where ODBC supports, only then JDBC code will work, right? So ODBC API is totally depends native API, or native API depends totally on ADBC API. Then only we will be able to connect our application to the database. So this is the limitation of type 1 driver. So to overcome this limitation, there are second type of driver, name as type 2 driver. Now, type 2 driver communicate directly with the native API. So you can see there is no ODBC API as it was present in type 1 driver. There is no ODBC API. So ODBC API and native API are merged in this type 2 driver, as we can see. So type 2 driver makes a call directly to the native API call, and it is more efficient since there is one less layer as compared with type 1 driver to connect with open database, and it is dependent on the existence of the native API for the database. So client application can be connected with the database through this native API. Now, another type of driver is type 3 driver. Type 3 driver makes a calls to the middleware component that are running on the another server. So here there is middleware server that through which we can connect our application to the database. So this is the process through which we can connect our application to the database. So type 3 driver makes a calls to the middleware component running on another server, and it communicates use a database independent net protocol. Middleware server then makes a calls to the database using database specific protocol, and the program sends JDBC calls through the JDBC driver to the middle tier. And this middle tier may use any type of driver, whether it is type 1 driver or type 2 driver, to communicate with the database. And the next type of driver is type 4 driver. Type 4 driver is called as a all Java driver. That is also called as a thin driver. It issue a request directly to the database without using any other middle layer or middleware or any other native API or ODBC API as it was present in type 1, type 2 driver. So there is no middle layers in between an application and a database. So it requests directly to the database using its native protocol, and it can be used directly on platform with a Java virtual machine. This type of driver is most efficient because the request goes through only one layer, and it is simplest as well to deploy since there is no additional libraries or middleware required to connect our application with the database. So these were the 4 types of drivers that we use to connect our application with the database. Now the next topic is how to connect the database. So JDBC provides some conceptual components through which we can connect our application to the database, like driver manager, driver connection, statements, metadata, and result set. So driver manager is a class that loads the database drivers and manages the connection between the application and the driver. So driver manager class will manage the connections between the application and the driver, and driver is another class that translates this API calls into operation for a specific database. There is another class called as a connection class that provides a session between the application and a data source. There is another class named as a statement that is used to create SQL statement, and it provides the result or perform a query or update database. Another type of component of JDBC is metadata that provide the information about return data that is executed through the query, database access, and driver. Now next and last component that is very essential component, that is a result set. Result set is a logical set of columns and rows of the data that is written by executing the statement. A statement means SQL statement. So after executing the SQL statement, that the result will be processed through this result set. So driver manager will create a connection, then connection class will establish a link to the database, and also it create the statement, and statement is a SQL statement through which we will run our SQL query, and this statement creates some result set, and this statement also takes help of driver to process this result, and this driver is directly connected with the database. So in this way our application is connected to the database, and we run actually the query to access the data or to update the data in the database. So as I told you, some basic steps. So basic steps is, firstly we need to basic steps to make a Java application. The first step is import the necessary classes. So by writing the import statement, import java.sql, we can import the necessary classes that are required to connect our application with the database. Then we will load the JDBC driver. Then we will identify the data source. Then we will establish a connection. Then we will create the statements object. Then we will execute the query using the statement object that is created in the before step. And then we will retrieve the data from result set object. And at last we will create the result set, statement, and connection object in the same order as we created, right? So these are the basic steps through which we can connect our application with the database. So the important classes are statement, JDBC driver, and connection, that we need to remember when we will create the, and result set, when we will create the program for connecting application to the database. So let's see the example through which we will better understand what are the different classes and how these objects works. So to connect our application with the database, one more step we need to do in Windows environment, that Firstly, we will create the database. For example, I'm making a database in MS Access, name as music, and inside music database I'm creating a table name as a recording, right? So music are database and this one is a table, right? Now after making a database and a table in MS Access, what we will do, we will go to the setting of the Windows, and then we will go to the control panel, then we will select the data source, then we will go to the administrative tools, then we will select the data source where we actually store, like music database. Then we will select a tab named as a DSN tab, right? And after seeing the DSN tab, we will open the open database source and we will click add button. Then after clicking add button, there will be option name as a MDB Microsoft Access driver. So this one is a music.mdb. This is the steps to connect MS Access, Microsoft Access database. So firstly, you will load the driver and then you will click finish. After that, you will set this page. You will give the name to the database, music database. As I told you that we make the music database, and description we can give that there it contains table name as a recording. And after selecting the location, you will click the select button and then you will select the location of the database and then you will click OK. So in this way, JVM will know that where actually the data is stored, and this data will be used to connect your application with the database. Now next step is write the program through which we will manipulate this table that is created in music database, or we will use the data that is stored in this table. So firstly, first step was import the necessary Java classes. So I write a statement import java.sql. Then I am writing a class name as a connect access. So any name you can give to the class. I just give connect access. Then it is a main function. The first step is to load the driver. To load the driver, we need to call a method name as a class.forName method. So you will use as it is class.forName method, and inside this you will write this string, the name of the driver, sun.jdbc.odbc, JDBC ODBC driver. Here the J is in capital, O is in capital, D is in capital. Now you will define the data source through which we need to call the driver. So my database, as I told you that I make a database named as a music. So I will write a string and I can take the object name as a source URL JDBC colon ODBC colon music. So this line, this one is a database name. Now next step is to establish a connection to the database. So I need to call driver manager class and call the get connection method, where I will pass this source URL inside this method. And after, if it is okay, then I can print like system.out.println connected connection. Now next step is to execute the statement, create the statement, then execute the statement. So statement is a class. I make an object of this class named as a statement. You can give any name to this one. and you will write database connection dot create statement. Now you are going to create this statement, and you can take this statement in the string. So I take string as a data type, and then object of the string is query string. You can give any name to this one, and I just want to select the recording title and last price, the two attribute that are stored inside the recording table. So I just write the SQL statement inside this string, query string, and I will write this one inside the double quotes as it is a string. To select two field, recording and recording title and list price that are selecting from the recording table. Now the next step is to execute the query. So to execute the query, we need a result set class, and I will create the object of result set result, and I will execute this result of this query with the object of statement. So statement dot execute query is a func method, and a query string is a string where we are actually storing this SQL, right? And you will pass inside this. Now after fetching the results, we can print it using while loop. Results dot next, this results will come here dot next, and this will be printed as a array to get a string recording title plus results dot get float value of the last price. So in this way, the result will come from the string through in which statement is written, and will display here using the while loop. Now we will close the connections. Firstly, we will close the connection. Then we will close the class, and then this one is the closer of this connection. Then this one is the closer of the this one is this is the closer of connection. This one is the closer of the class, and this is the closer of statement and result set, right? So in this way we can connect our application to the database, and there may be some exceptions. So I just put try and catch block inside the program, try block here, and catch block here. So you may put try and catch block, or you may not put, but the essential classes are connection class, statement class, and result set class. So these are the important classes that we need to remember when we will create an application to connect our database, right? So that's all about for JDBC. In the next lecture, we will discuss a new topic. Thank you.